my swollen finger in front of 600 guests, then slapped me so hard the whole ballroom went silent. That night, I lost the baby he never knew existed, and I decided he would lose everything else. My name is Vivian, and this is how I ended a man who thought I was too broken to fight back. I had been married to Nathaniel Ashworth for 3 years, the golden boy of Ashworth Enterprises, when his dying first love, Brielle, showed up at our charity gala wanting my grandmother ring as a keepsake. I refused. Nathaniel twisted my finger until the skin tore, tossed the ring onto an auction tray, and when I stood frozen with blood dripping down my hand, he slapped me across the face in front of everyone and told me to go home and reflect on my behavior. I walked out into the rain, dropped that ring down a storm drain myself, and collapsed against a street lamp as cramping tore through me. I was 2 weeks pregnant and had not even told him yet. By the time I reached the hospital, the doctors called it a threatened miscarriage, said there was still a small chance to save it if a family member signed the risk forms. I looked at the clock and told them not to bother. I signed the papers alone and let them finish it. That was the only tear I shed that whole night, and I wiped it away before the anesthesia even took hold. At 4 a.m, I called an old friend in Paris, unfroze a private trust fund Nathaniel never knew I had, and packed 1 suitcase, nothing sentimental, just my passport and a laptop. I cut the silk tie I had spent 3 months embroidering for his birthday into ribbons and left it in the trash with my hospital paperwork sitting on the coffee table for him to find. Then I disappeared before sunrise. Nathaniel woke to the sonogram and the surgical consent form instead of a wife. Within the hour, he had frozen every card in my name, grounded every private jet I could charter, and locked my domestic accounts, certain a woman fresh out of surgery with no money would crawl home within days. What he did not know was that I had a European trust of my own, one my father quietly set up years earlier, one Nathaniel had never bothered to ask about. I had his security team retrieve every piece of jewelry and every heirloom from our house, 47 pieces worth over $300 million, and instead of selling them, I had my people smash every last one into powder and shredded leather, packed the wreckage into crates, and mailed it straight to his office with his name on the label. When he called, gloating that I was now penniless and blacklisted from every fashion house in the country, I read him back the exact ledger of the affair he thought he had hidden, the secret medical trust he had funded for Brielle using my identity as cover. Then I told him I had already cut my own official seal in half so he could never forge my signature again, and hung up. For 3 months, I vanished completely while he had my name quietly banned from every luxury company in America. Certain hunger would eventually bring me crawling back. He had no idea that under a new name, I had spent those months becoming the most sought-after couture designer in Europe, known only as Sia, the night of the Paris couture finale. Nathaniel flew in chasing a partnership with the legendary designer who could save his collapsing stock price, dragging Brielle along in a gown he could barely afford anymore. When the crowd parted for a black car and the head of the entire couture council personally opened the door, Nathaniel watched, thunderstruck, as I stepped out onto the red carpet he had been begging for a seat near. I did not look at him once as I walked past into the doors reserved only for royalty. Backstage that night, when he finally cornered me holding his company's partnership proposal, I told him calmly that the historic factory his empire depended on had never actually belonged to him, that my trust had quietly bought it 2 years earlier, and he had only ever been managing it on my behalf. I cut off his raw material supply that same morning, then took a pen and slashed a giant X through his 100-page proposal in front of the entire industry and told him to take his garbage and leave my show. Within days, an anonymous ledger hit every major newsroom in America, exposing Brielle's family charity as a money laundering front, and federal agents raided her parents at the airport. His stock crashed $40 billion in a single morning, and his own uncle stormed into his office screaming that the whole family would burn with him unless he flew to Paris and begged me to drop the international arbitration case I had filed over the factory. He found me at my studio in the middle of the night, soaked from the rain, and offered me $20 billion. Every share of his company, every property he owned, kneeling in an actual international courtroom the next morning in front of lawyers and his own family, begging me to come home. I let him finish. Then I read him the exact date he met with an offshore account manager and funneled $1 billion of company money into a hidden fund, logging it under my name as a personal investment loss, so that if regulators ever came looking, I would be the one who went to prison, not him. I slid a whistleblower file across the table instead of accepting his money, evidence I had already delivered to federal investigators that morning, and on top of it I placed our divorce papers. He signed both with shaking hands, believing it would finally end this. The moment the ink dried, French financial police walked through the door with an arrest warrant for transnational fraud, and I watched them put him in handcuffs without a single flicker of guilt. 6 months later, he asked to see me from behind prison glass, insisting that some part of me still cared, that I would not have come otherwise. I told him plainly I only came because ignoring the paperwork would cost me more time than signing it, and that every gentle memory he clung to from our marriage, the hallway light I always left on, the parties I always attended by his side, had actually been reconnaissance the whole time, a way to gather every account number and every buyer I would eventually need. 2 years after that, freshly released and broke, he burst into a family court session waving a tabloid photo of me holding a toddler, convinced I had secretly kept our child and demanding a paternity test and visitation rights. I set the surgical report from that very night on the table in front of him, proof the pregnancy had ended in that hospital years earlier, long before I ever left the country. The little girl in the photo was an orphan I had adopted on my own a year prior, a child who would never carry a single trace of his name or his blood, and who would never know he existed. I had him sign a restraining order on the spot, permanently barring him from coming near either of us again. Now I run my design house from a sunlit studio on the Seine, and some afternoons my daughter runs across the courtyard to show me an autumn leaf she found, and I scoop her up without a single thought of the man who once tried to own me. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of him from a distance, thinner now, standing exactly 500 yards away because that is as close as the law allows him to come, watching a life he destroyed and could never touch again. If Vivian's story kept you hooked until the very last word, make sure you hit subscribe because the Revenge Tales brings you a brand new story just like this one every single week. And trust me, the next one hits even harder.